What if the real problem isn't your life, but the noise inside your own mind? Ethan Cole was walking down a quiet street, but inside his head it felt like a storm that never stopped, thoughts crashing into each other, replaying old conversations, imagining future failures, questioning every decision he had made. And even the smallest mistake from years ago would return as if it had just happened, tightening his chest and stealing his breath. He tried to distract himself with work, with music, with scrolling through his phone, but nothing lasted. The silence always came back, and when it did, it was louder than ever. At night he would lie in bed staring at the ceiling for hours, his body tired but his mind running miles ahead, jumping from fear to doubt to regret without pause. It felt like carrying something heavy that no one else could see, something he couldn't put down no matter how hard he tried. And the more he fought it, the stronger it seemed to grow, until one simple question began to echo in his mind. A question he couldn't ignore. What if the weight he was carrying was never meant to be held at all the next morning? Ethan sat at his desk with a cup of coffee growing cold in his hands, staring at a simple email he needed to send, yet his fingers would not move. His mind kept whispering, what if you say the wrong thing? What if they judge you? What if this leads to something worse? And suddenly a 2-minute task felt like a mountain miles high. He leaned back in his chair and rubbed his temples, trying to silence the noise. But the more he tried to push it away, the louder it became, every thought pulling him in a different direction like waves crashing against a fragile boat. Later that day he met a friend for lunch, but even as they talked, Ethan was not really there. He nodded, he smiled, but inside he was somewhere else, replaying old memories, worrying about tomorrow, questioning things that had not even happened. His friend paused and asked if he was okay, and Ethan forced a small smile, saying he was just tired, but deep down he knew it was more than that. It was the constant weight of thinking too much about everything. As the sun began to set, Ethan found himself walking without direction, his feet moving but his mind still racing, until he reached a quiet lake on the edge of town, where the noise of the world seemed to fade, and for a brief moment, something inside him slowed, just enough for him to notice a man sitting perfectly still by the water, as if the chaos Ethan felt had never touched him at all. The man did not move when Ethan approached. He simply sat there by the edge of the lake, watching the water as if nothing else existed. And for a moment Ethan hesitated, unsure why this stillness felt so unfamiliar. Then he spoke, his voice carrying the weight of everything he had been holding inside, asking how someone could sit so calmly while the world felt so loud. The man turned slowly, his expression gentle, his eyes steady, and there was something in that gaze that made Ethan feel seen without being judged. The man introduced himself as Elias and listened without interrupting as Ethan poured out his thoughts, the constant worry, the doubt, the endless noise that never seemed to rest. When Ethan finally finished, expecting advice or a long explanation, Elias simply smiled and said very little. Instead, he reached beside him and picked up a small metal spoon and a bottle of water, carefully filling the spoon until it was almost overflowing. Then he placed it into Ethan's hand and said, walk around the lake and come back without spilling a single drop. Ethan blinked in confusion. The request felt strange, almost too simple for something that was supposed to help him. But there was a quiet confidence in Elias that made it hard to question. And so, without fully understanding why, Ethan turned toward the path, holding the spoon carefully, unaware that this simple task was about to show him something he had been missing all along. The path around the lake stretched for nearly half a mile, quiet and lined with tall trees swaying gently in the evening breeze. And as Ethan took his first step, his eyes locked onto the spoon, the water trembling with even the slightest movement. He adjusted his grip, careful, steady, afraid that one careless step would cause it to spill. Each footstep became slower than the last, deliberate and controlled. The world around him began to fade. He did not notice the sound of distant voices, nor the rustling leaves, nor the soft ripples of the lake beside him. His attention narrowed, focused entirely on that single fragile surface of water. His breathing slowed. His thoughts, which once raced endlessly, began to quiet, not because he forced them to stop, but because there was no space left for them. Every ounce of his awareness was placed into one simple task, step by step, moment by moment, until time itself seemed to soften and for the first time in what felt like forever, Ethan was not lost in the past, nor trapped in the future. He was only here, walking, holding, watching, and something inside him, something that had been restless for so long, began to settle without him even realizing it. When Ethan finally reached the end of the path, his hand was steady, the water still resting in the spoon, without a single drop lost. He let out a quiet breath he did not realize he had been holding, and slowly walked back toward Elias. The world around him returning piece by piece, the sound of the wind, the distant voices, the gentle movement of the lake. Yet something felt different now, lighter, as if the weight inside his mind had softened. He handed the spoon back, expecting some explanation, but Elias simply looked at him and asked a question. While you were walking, did you think about your past mistakes? Ethan shook his head. Did you worry about what might happen tomorrow? Again, Ethan answered no. Did you feel the noise that usually fills your mind? Ethan paused, surprised by his own answer. No, not at all. Elias nodded slowly, as if this was the answer he had been waiting for. And in that quiet moment, Ethan began to realize something subtle but powerful, something he had never noticed before, that the silence he had been searching for was not found by escaping his life, but by placing his attention somewhere else entirely. Ethan stood there quietly, the spoon now empty in his hand, as Elias looked out across the lake, the surface calm and undisturbed. Then the old man spoke in a soft, steady voice. The noise in your mind does not come from the world. It comes from where you place your attention. Ethan listened closely. Something about those words felt simple, yet undeniable. Elias continued, when your attention is scattered, your mind becomes scattered. When your attention is pulled into the past, you feel regret. When it is pulled into the future, you feel fear. And when it is pulled in every direction, you feel overwhelmed. Ethan slowly nodded, recognizing every word as something he had lived through. Elias then pointed gently toward the path Ethan had just walked. For that short time, your attention was held in one place, and because of that, your mind had no space to create stress, doubt, or anxiety. Ethan looked down at the spoon, realizing that nothing around him had changed. The world was still the same, but his experience of it had shifted completely. And in that realization, a quiet understanding began to form. That peace was not something he needed to find somewhere else. It was something he created by choosing where to focus. The wind moved gently across the surface of the lake, creating small ripples that faded just as quickly as they appeared. And Ethan watched them, noticing something he had never paid attention to before, how each ripple only lasted for a moment before the water returned to stillness. Elias spoke again. Your thoughts are like those ripples. They appear, they move, and they disappear, but only if you do not keep touching the water. Ethan felt a quiet shift inside him, realizing that he had been stirring his own mind constantly, holding on to every thought, replaying it, feeding it, giving it more life than it ever needed. Elias picked up a small stone and gently dropped it into the lake. Circles expanded outward before slowly dissolving. You do not need to stop thoughts from appearing, he said calmly. You only need to stop holding on to them. Ethan stood there, letting that sink in, understanding that his suffering had not come from the thoughts themselves, but from his habit of clinging to them. And for the first time, he saw a different way, not fighting his mind, not running from it, but simply allowing it to settle on its own, like water when it is finally left undisturbed. The sky had begun to dim, soft shades of orange and blue stretching across the horizon, and Ethan stood there in silence, no longer searching for answers, just feeling the stillness he had been chasing for so long. It was not overwhelming, it was quiet, almost unnoticed, like a gentle breath after holding it for too long. Elias looked at him and said nothing, as if the lesson no longer needed words. Ethan slowly closed his eyes for a moment, and when a thought appeared, he did not chase it. He did not fight it. He simply let it pass, like watching a cloud drift across the sky without trying to hold it. And in that small moment, he realized something that felt almost too simple to be true. The peace he had been searching for was never hidden. It was never far away. It had always been there, waiting behind the noise, waiting for him to stop holding on. When he opened his eyes again, the world looked the same. The lake, the trees, the fading light. Nothing had changed, and yet everything felt different, lighter, clearer. as if the weight he once carried had quietly slipped away without him noticing when it happened as the last light of the day faded. Ethan took a slow breath and looked out across the lake one more time. The surface calm, untouched, reflecting the sky without resistance. And for the first time, he understood that nothing outside had changed. The world was still uncertain, still unpredictable, still full of noise. But something inside him had shifted in a way that felt quiet yet undeniable. He no longer felt the urge to chase every thought or solve every fear. Instead, he noticed them and let them pass. Just as the ripples faded on the water, Elias stood up gently, giving a small nod as if to say, "The lesson was complete," and Ethan watched as the man began to walk away, disappearing slowly along the path, leaving behind nothing but silence and understanding. Ethan remained by the lake for a moment longer, holding that stillness, knowing that the noise might return, that thoughts would come again. But now he carried something different, not control, not certainty, but awareness. And as he turned to leave, a simple realization stayed with him, one that felt both small and powerful at the same time. That peace is not found by changing the world, but by choosing what you give your attention to, moment by moment.